Well, hot on the heels of AMD's Vega release is the GTX 1070 Ti from NVIDIA, or Ti. Sometimes they call it Ti in the press releases, so I'm always confused. Why does this card need to exist? So the card I'm taking a look at is the MSI GTX 1070 Ti. Now they sent this to me ahead of time, so this is a pre-release press thing, just so you know. But I've had a little while to play with this. It turns out NVIDIA put up the drivers last Thursday, so I've had about a week to play with this, about a week to benchmark it, about a week to look at it. And the 1070 Ti, MSI has done a great job putting the card together. It's whisper quiet. We're going to get to all that, but I think that you can get your benchmarks anywhere. But the commentary is perhaps a bit more interesting. Why does this card need to exist? Well, if you look at the 1070 and the 1080, those cards were originally released about 18 months ago. And they've been on the market for 18 months. And, the AMD just released the Vega 64 and Vega 56. Vega 56 is the better deal, I think, as most sites have concluded. The Vega 56 is the better deal because it'll give you near 1080 performance for around $399, around $400. And so, you might say, oh, this is a little bit of a response to that. But I don't really think that AMD Vega has a lot to do with the 1070 Ti. What I do think that the 1070 Ti has to do with is the increase in cost of video cards in general. Paul's Hardware did a video on why it sucks to build a computer right now, and video card price was one of those things. Video card price has gone up, especially from Team Red, but also from Team Green, because of miners and other people buying up lots and lots of graphics cards. And so when the 1080 Ti was released earlier in 2017, the upgraded version of the 1080, that pushed the price of 1080s, Founders Edition 1080s especially, down to around $450. So like this card, for example, is a Founders Edition GTX 1080. I was able to purchase this for around $450 shipped, which is pretty great. And this has to do a lot with e-tailers wanting to liquidate their GTX 1080 stocks after the 1080 Ti was in stock, and some other reasons like that, because the 1080 Ti, of course, is a more expensive card. But there's something else that's going on, and that is the price of GDDR5X memory has also gone up a little bit in the last 18 months. And so NVIDIA may be looking at a higher manufacturing cost, or they may be thinking that the manufacturing costs have not gone down as much as they've expected. So the GTX 1070 Ti uses the GDDR5 memory, which is a little slower. The GDDR5 memory has a little bit less memory bandwidth. In a lot of ways, the GTX 1070 Ti is an upgraded version of the GTX 1070, as the name implies. There are more stream processors. There's 19 stream processors, whereas you have 15 on the 1070 and 20 on the GTX 1080. So it's a little bit different computationally. In terms of clock speed, the base clock is 100 megahertz higher. The boost clock is basically the same. Now in terms of overclockability, the Founders Edition 1080, even the Founders Edition 1080, was pretty overclockable. The aftermarket cards, from the board partners like MSI, was of course much more overclockable. The GTX 1070, there were rumors that the 1070 Ti would not be overclockable. Well, I'm here to report it is in fact overclockable, but the extra stream processors and the GDDR5 sort of still limit its overclockability. I think the 1080 is a better bet in terms of overclockability and what you're going to do with that. Yes, you can hit a 2 gigahertz overclock with this. It's tricky, but it's doable. We only got a sample size of 1. I don't think I would run it at that speed, that boost speed, all the time. But the performance is pretty good. The performance basically is on par with the GTX 1080 in situations where the memory bandwidth doesn't help you. If you're playing certain games where memory bandwidth makes a big difference, then you're going to see less performance. So of course we benchmark Rise of the Tomb Raider and older titles like GTA 5, put it through its paces. Basically this card is GTX 1080 levels of performance for around $450 in most scenarios. So even with the inflation and all of the other stuff, we're sort of back to where we were in terms of cost and prices and things like that. And I think this is also a way for NVIDIA to make a splash in the media. It's like, AMD's released a card, NVIDIA has also released a card, but the GTX 1080 and the 1080 Ti still pretty much kings of the hill. So if you You know, if you bought a 1080 or a 1080 Ti, you know, 1080 18 months ago, or a 1080 Ti 6 months ago, you're fine. A 1070 Ti, if you were waiting for a deal and you didn't score one of those $450 Founders Edition 1080s, I think those days are probably over, although maybe you can keep your eyes peeled and get a pretty good deal. But if you're looking for a solid value, 1070 Ti will get you there because of the BOM costs and some other things, unless you find a deal. You know, I don't know. You could deal shop and try to find a 1080 for $450, but I think you would only get a Founders Edition. Now, in terms of like, you know, other stuff is like, well, at the lower end, so the 1070, the Founder Editions, you could find those pretty readily for around $350. Maybe an upgraded one for $400, $420, something like that. Well, the Founders Edition version of the 1070 Ti starts at $450. So $50 more than the Founders Edition 1070. Is it worth the extra $50? Yes, absolutely. It is definitely worth the $50 because you basically are going to get 1080 level performance for only another $50. Now, when I talk about price and I say, you know, the 1070 Ti is around $450, I am, of course, talking about the Founders Edition of the 1070. The MSI version is going to be a little bit more expensive because it comes with a much better cooler, the Twin Frozer 2, runs whisper quiet, better overclockability, better construction. You got the backplate support and other features like that. So take that into account when I'm talking about pricing. But let's talk about the MSI version of the 1070 Ti because MSI has added a special sauce to this. It is a dual fan design that is Twin Frozer 6. So if you're familiar with like Twin Frozer and you've been impressed by Twin Frozer in the past, yes, Twin Frozer 6, you get that on this card. This card is whisper quiet. The power supply fan is actually considerably louder than the fans on this card, and the fans will actually shut off completely when the card is under load. It also has MSI's Mystic Light, the RGB control system, so it'll integrate and work fine with all of your Mystic Light controls, and it comes with the software, and it's able to do that. MSI has done a really good job putting this card together, in my opinion. It's very well manufactured. It's got a back plate. It's got a black and red color scheme. You can change some of the colorization a little bit with the RGB side of things. It might have been nice to have a little bit more subdued color scheme. There are some other versions of this from MSI that have a different color scheme if that's your thing. But in terms of connectors, it's got one DVI, one HDMI, and 3 DisplayPort 1.4 connections. So that's basically the same as you would expect from cards in this generation. It, of course, has 8 gigabytes of GDDR5. It's GDDR5, not GDDR5X. 256 gigabit memory bandwidth. It's a pretty solid card overall. One other cool feature of the construction of this card, it's got a built-in sort of sag eliminator. I don't really know what to call it. There's this metal bracket that attaches to the back plate and connects to the PCB, so I'll be real surprised if you have sag issues with this card. This is a good value at $450. I thought the 1080 was a good value at $450. I've actually been trying to pick up another one, and I really haven't had much luck. Now, the Founders Edition 1080, honestly, I think the Founders Edition 1080 was a little bit of a misfire because once the card gets warm, and I don't know, I guess everybody that buys the Founders Edition 1080 is probably going to put it underwater, right? I mean, that's pretty much standard. The board partners have really done a good job with cooling and overclockability on the GTX 1080. Now, the GTX 1080 has a single 8-pin power connector. This 1070 Ti has one 8-pin and one 6-pin for auxiliary power. Although even with the 2 gigahertz overclock, I don't think it really needed both power connectors. But hey, if you want to go nuts with your overclock, that's fine. You got the options for power delivery, that kind of thing. This has been a really quickie launch day review. I've tried to keep it as succinct as possible. We're going to be testing this card on Linux just as soon as the drivers are updated to support this particular part number. I actually had a little trouble getting the 388.10 drivers from NVIDIA's website. We got the drivers really, really late, honestly. So, but we did get the drivers and we were able to do the testing and that kind of stuff. So be sure to look out for a cats per second AI benchmark on this thing coming up. I think it's going to be pretty interesting. So we'll see. But yeah, 1070 Ti. It's a really interesting product. It's a really interesting response, I think, to rising BOM costs. But if you think I'm off base, or you think maybe that this card doesn't belong, or it's like, why does this card need a reason to exist, or you want to I don't know, provide some feedback, or maybe there's something I missed or whatever, join us in the forums at Level 1 Techs. I'm Wendell. I'm signing out. I'll see you there.